Okay, perfect. All right. Go ahead and call this, excuse me, call this session order. So this is the work session on Project Anchorage, where we're going to focus on the projects. So let's start with member introductions.
Mark Littlefield. Scott Myers. Zach Johnson.
Randy Salt, and anyone on the phone? No, no one's on the phone. Okay, and then we have guests.
Michelle Claudio with AEDC.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Okay, just to go over the timeline. Sorry. So this is our slow down. Okay, this is our work session on Project Anchorage, focus on the projects. We will then have at the December 3rd meeting, the second public hearing. And then after that, we'll have two more work sessions. One will be the S version, which ideally the S version is going to pull all the amendments together. And the other one will be around regressivity of Project Anchorage. It's Thursday. Okay, I'm going to apologize as I go through the presentation. I'm going to have to, I guess, okay, there we go. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So just a reminder of the goals for Project Anchorage, three main goals. First is invest in us. So make Anchorage a place that we want to live in, improve our quality of life, and try to boost our population by having people return back to Anchorage. The second is property tax relief. And the third is to diversify our tax base. Commuters, transient workers, and tourists use most of our services for free. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so again, this is about projects. So the project parameters that Project Anchorage use, we want about 5 to 7 projects ideal. You know, we got to match the funding or the forecasted funding with the projects. Transformational projects, large, new, exciting capital projects. Geographical diversity, so Eagle River, Girdwood, downtown, and other areas within Anchorage. Subject diversity, try to broaden the projects out so they're not all cookie cutter, sports, arts, child focused, and outdoors, and able to be enjoyed during all 4 seasons, which is important for our locality. Okay, next slide. So the way the projects came in is they were broadcast and advertised through community councils, assembly meetings, and collected online through a site that AEDC set up. We had over 300 recommendations that came in crowdsourced. Some were a simple 1-liner, 2-liner idea. Some were full-blown projects that have been in the works for quite some time. Those projects were then pooled and given to a project selection committee to go through criteria such as impact, feasibility, diversity, and validated by the survey data that was completed in advance that kind of told us what Anchorage residents wanted in projects. Next slide. The MAPS project finalists. So these aren't the projects, but they are down to the ones that are most likely appear in Project Anchorage. So let's go to our first one in no particular order. So an indoor market. So those that have seen indoor markets throughout the U.S., they're becoming more and more popular. I'll describe it as sort of an indoor food hall recreation area. The one pictured there is the garage, which is based in Indianapolis, has a variety of food vendors, games, activities, and a great gathering place. So a couple comparisons: the Oxbow Public Market, Anaheim Packing District, Grand Central Market, Reading Terminal Market. So hopefully you've seen some of these. And then what the costing committee did is looked up rough cost for these projects and then tried to equate that to what that would cost to build in Anchorage. So with these projects, I'll use this one as an example. If a private developer or someone is building a market like this in Anchorage, we're probably not going to compete with them. So projects may change, or how can we make the area better to, again, invest in our community. So we make a small investment, but the local businesses and entrepreneurs bring in other businesses to help flesh out the area. Okay, next project. Ship Creek redevelopment. So this, we have a great world-class asset downtown in Ship Creek that is occupied largely by the railroad. We do have the Ulu factory and a few other sites there, but we're not fully taking advantage of that. So the inspiration for this is the Gathering Place in Tulsa, and I believe Oklahoma City has something similar, but an area that we can recreate in. You know, I've been coming up here since 1990. My wife's been here since the 70s. And just this summer, we were downtown at the mouth of Ship Creek and saw the belugas. Never knew the belugas came to the mouth of Ship Creek. So again, a great asset that we're probably not taking advantage of. Okay, next project. Nordic Aquatic Center. So several northern climates have aquatic centers, so swim lanes, lazy rivers, slides, let your imagination go to work. So we have some examples of Syncrude Aquatic Center, Diamond Aquatic Center down in Juneau, and the Nikiski Pool. So some great reference items. And again, these were some of the top recommendations by the public during our survey. Next project. Four Seasons Trail Facilities. So we have great trails and great outdoor spaces in our city, but we lack use because we don't have maybe the accompanying asset to go with it. So one I'll bring up, which isn't on this list, but Cuddy Park has a great ice skating rink for racing. I don't know what the technical name for that is, but there's no center associated with it. So people pull up in their car, change on the grass or on the snow or park benches. So this project looks at supplementing around Kincaid, Goose Lake, Westchester Lagoon. Some have existing facilities that need redevelopment, and some have no facility. And also in this project was talks of things like Hilltop Ski Area as well. Next slide. Downtown Arts and Entertainment Redevelopment. So this is around the PAC, which in Town Square Park. So when we had Project 80s, a lot of these projects were built without the operation cost built in. The Denina Center came in and pulled the Egan's operating cost in with it. The PAC is still on its own. So part of this project would be ideally in all the projects to cover the operating cost of the project's life in the project cost. So we'd pull the PAC in, but also redevelop Town Square Park. Now, I believe there's a $2 million budget item for redevelopment of Town Square Park. So this would be in association with that. And the larger project that you could see downtown with Ship Creek in this area is really connecting from the Park Strip through Town Square Park over to the Mushing District towards the Saturday Market, towards Ship Creek. So again, make this a nice, open, connected space and tying that all together. Next project, Chester Creek Sports Complex. So redevelopment of the complex there. Some of the examples of the Cabot College Baseball Complex, the Loring Park Pickleball Courts. Some of the ideas, there's been some examples out there of moving Mulcahy, redeveloping the Sullivan area, redeveloping the ice hockey rinks, possibly some housing, shopping, things like that. So again, this project, again, will be more fleshed out as it comes to fruition. Next. Anchorage Sports Complex. Again, a year-round community sports facility, providing again indoor spaces and outdoor spaces for the community to use year-round through all 4 seasons. You could argue you only have 2. Some of the examples, we have a great facility in the Dome, which is just the Dome, and the other is the Savage Sports Complex. So, in Anchorage. So I encourage you to, as we go through these, and you get a copy of this presentation from the website, you can go in and look up some of these locations and see what the inspirations are. Next slide. Again, in the theme of geographic diversity, and we are welcomed by Mr. Gates and Mr. Volant. Thank you. In the signs. Oh, Mr. Martinez. Thank you. Sorry, George. In the vein of geographic diversity, we wanted to make sure we had projects in Eagle River and Girdwood. So this is the project that came out of Eagle River, was a sports complex. And you can see the inspiration, the Spooky Nook Sports Complex and the Fargo Parks Sports Center. Go ahead to the next slide. And then we have a children's museum. Again, location's not really set for that, but a lot of cities have a great children's museum as part of their museum complex. We've had children's museums in the past run as nonprofit. I'm pretty sure we do not have one now. So the goal would be to try to bring something like this back. And Imaginarium at Anchorage Museum or Science Museum in Minnesota are the inspirations. Next slide. Girdwood Arts and Recreation District. So Girdwood, there's a lot going on with Girdwood. A lot of things around the resort and the 3 phases of development there. They've been an excellent partner with this community of Girdwood and the Little Bears Daycare Center. And from the Girdwood community, they would like more of a arts and recreation district as well as an RV park in the area near where Forest Fair is held. And the RV park will help solve some of their short-term needs around workforce housing, which they have definitely a workforce housing issue until they can catch up. Next slide. Took me a while to figure out what this slide is, but it's a top-down view of a snow grader. So one of the things we've heard from citizens is we'd like to see our fleets replaced around snow maintenance equipment and around APD vehicles. For me, this is a pretty easy choice. We're behind on our fleet program. The fleet is actually costing us more money than if we would have kept up with that program, which we basically cut investment in the program several administrations ago, and we're behind that curve. So the fleet, like APD, is costing us a lot more money than it should. Simple repairs on a new fleet are light bulbs, and repairs on an older fleet are things like a transmission. A lot more expensive, take a lot more time. In the mayor's budget, there is a levy currently for this purpose, and what we're looking to do is potentially pull this into Project Anchorage, as it is something that the citizens have spoke up they'd like to see happen. It's also a project that we can complete fairly quickly and early on in the project. Next slide. Okay, so we have MAP project estimates. I kind of touched on how those are estimated. We do have some help in the room if we have questions related to the estimation of the projects. You can see that we did include roughly a 4% charge for operations and maintenance for the projects. And the projects were based on comparisons and trying to adjust those costs for Anchorage. As far as the probability of accuracy, we don't have that quite yet, but it's probably still pretty low at this point, until at least we get to a design engineering phase. Next slide. Just a map showing the proposed locations for a lot of the projects. The dark blues are fairly set. The light blues don't really have a location, although you could argue things like the Children's Museum would most likely be downtown. Next slide. So the adjustment mechanisms. So projects may be commenced, continued, completed, and/or concluded in whole or in part. These recommendations will be made by the MAP Citizen Advisory and Oversight Board. So we have to have some flexibility built into this, and those recommendations will be approved by the Assembly. Next slide. So the MAP's Citizen Advisory and Oversight Board is enacted at the discretion of the mayor. So we have a lot of boards and commissions right now. So do we want another one? In this case, probably, but we're leaving that option based on feedback for the mayor to enact that project or not. 7 seats, again, appointed by the mayor, but approved by the Assembly. And again, they'll recommend adjustments to the list of projects, appropriations for O&M, report on the annual status of the tax, and recommend exemptions. Next slide. And just back where we started. So reminding us of the goals of Project Anchorage: to invest in us, property tax relief, and diversify our tax base. And I believe that is the end. But next slide, I think that's the end. Okay, so we'll open it up for questions. Zach?
Yeah, thanks. A few questions. I think I'll start with 2 and then let somebody else go. What was the process for selecting these finalists from all the broad slate of projects that were put forward?
Yeah, go ahead.
So we went through a pretty robust community process to get these ideas. We took inspiration from Oklahoma City, who had a long conversation with their community before they implemented the first maps. And so the first thing that we did was we put together a website in June of this summer that was open through September 15th, so over 90 days. And the purpose of that website was just to collect ideas from all over the community of Anchorage. We didn't put parameters on how detailed the submissions needed to be. Our goal was really just to get a really robust ideas from all over, to make sure that we are getting the best representation from Anchorage and meeting the needs of residents. So we had that solicitation portal open for 90 days, like I said. During that time, we went out to community council meetings. We went to do as many public presentations as we possibly could. We reached out to nonprofit organizations, asking them to get the word out to their network. We did invest in some paid media. We got some earned media. And all of that was just to make sure that as many people as possible knew about this portal. Through that process, we got over 300 submissions. We stood up a volunteer committee who took a couple of different layers on how to select the final projects that you're looking at today. First, we kind of organized them into buckets. So there were a lot of projects, for instance, downtown, and they were very different. But what it told us was that residents really wanted to see investment in the downtown core. So we put those projects into one bucket. From there, the selection committee members applied a set of evaluation criteria to the different projects on an independent basis that we went through and averaging process to see which ones rose to the top. Then we took another community feedback approach and sent the top recommended projects from the project selection committee out to a professional poll. We got over 500 responses to that poll that informed the final slate that you're looking at today. So as part of that poll, we said, are these projects that you as the residents of Anchorage would generally support or oppose? And what you're looking at are those that they would have a net amount of support for.
Thanks. Can you share any insights? I mean, from that poll, it sounds like some projects were favored. Was there anything else to be gleaned from the responses there in terms of amongst the polling respondents? Like, was there a percentage you said, no, I don't like any of this, or something wildly different? Can you, any insights on what sort of you got as a temperature reading from that?
There was about, between 25 to 30% that said, kind of oppose in general. And then there was, in general, like it looks like about 50 to 60% that supported most of the top projects. There were some things that weren't as popular as we expected them to be. We pulled some stuff like a music venue and an amphitheater that, seemed like those would be cool ideas for Anchorage, but they didn't pull great with the public. And so they didn't make it to the final list, for example.
Okay, Mr. Voland?
Thank you. And I apologize, I was a little bit late, so I might have missed the framing at the outset. So these projects, this is kind of like inspiration, ideas, or these are actually like selections that will be passed on because we don't have the board that was mentioned assembled. Is that something that's going to be done prior to the first round of project selection?
Yeah, these are the finalists. So they're not the set projects. We still want to get those in before, I believe, the S version comes out.
Who chooses the finalist?
Well, it's the project selection committee and the costing committee. So right now, I believe we're oversubscribed for what we estimate would be the revenue versus the projects.
Mm-hmm. So this is a concern that I just want to flag, not to debate the item, but just to say, we may be running into a similar issue here with like the cost of stuff where the advocates are choosing the projects. So my question would be, how do we get the widest input possible from the widest group of stakeholders and potentially folks who maybe have not yet engaged in the process of nominating, or I don't know. I could just see where this money, there's a lot of stakeholders. I mean, we've heard from the Nordic ski folks. We've heard from, I'm sure we'll hear from community council folks. And I just want to make sure that there's a seat for everyone at the table. And I think as part of that, another question I would have is if we form this board or commission, are there specific, like when we did the public naming commission, we added, there were like at-large seats, but then some had very specific qualifications. So you had to be a historian, or you had to be, you know, an expert you all know what I'm talking about. So would there be specific qualifications, or will it be divvied up among districts, or how would that work?
I'll let you jump in, but I'll first say we tried to paint enough of a picture so voters can understand what they're voting on, but not paint ourselves into a box to allow flexibility for things like that. Some of these projects, we may say this is the project and then find out it's not feasible. We just can't get the land, can't get whatever. So we want to build that flexibility there. So the board, again, is largely undefined. And that's what we'd expect to have defined. If the mayor chooses to enact it, that the assembly and the mayor work together to find what those positions look like, where they come from. Are they geographic? Are they experts?
I'm sorry, who defines? The mayor defines, or we define?
So right now,
Mhm.
the board implementation's at the will of the mayor. We left that as an option.
Okay,
And that was based on feedback.
interesting.
Um,
I could just see a situation where there's 7 board members and they're all from North Anchorage, downtown business advocates. And so the projects that get chosen, you know, I guess that would be something I would just kind of want to put out there, socialize at the outset. How do we get that maximum, capture all of that input? Thanks.
Okay, Member Martinez?
Thank you. Can you just remind me of some facts that you probably mentioned? How much do you expect to be collected annually?
So right now, the last estimate I remember was roughly around $180 million total.
I'm going to go with a conservative 150 just for my math purposes. And it was described that the breakdown of where those dollars would come from would be approximately an 80-20 split between residents at the 80 and a 20% of that aggregate number from what the expectation is of tourists. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
So that puts the number on the tourist share collected at approximately 30 million with my 50 million number.
That's correct. The one thing that doesn't include, we weren't able to estimate what commuters coming in from the valley or other areas would contribute.
So the tourist estimate doesn't necessarily account for the traveler, the regional traveler, Alaskan from the valley and et cetera.
Correct.
To the extent that we can track that with some degree of recognition of how the gas tax may give us some indicator of how much we gather from visitors, because that was one of the reasons why we put the gasoline tax, to capture some of the folks who are coming into Anchorage and collecting a little bit of that for our roads. So maybe there's some insight that we can glean from there. And what was the decision making between, before I get to that question, had there been polling related to the why this should pass, why people are interested in? And I mean I'm interested in the distinction between polling for property tax relief or polling for projects and versus each other. Is there any distinction between polling data and those two whys?
One of the original polls that we did before we stood up the project portal, we were going out to Anchorage residents to ask, is this type of proposal something that they would support? And so we did ask questions along those lines. If we're going to propose a sales tax in Anchorage, would you support just a basic sales tax? Well, what if there was property tax relief in it? What if we invested in Anchorage through capital projects? So we did ask those questions in a poll, and the results told us that the balance that we have proposed today is something that Anchorage voters would support.
Cool. I think that's high level and not as granular as the specificity of the crosstab that I'm interested in. Because just call it what it is. Fundamentally, those two elements are the sales pitch. You're not selling a sales tax. You're advancing a sales tax with a sales pitch built on property tax relief and projects. Projects are what the debate will be and what we're listening to today. And the Oklahoma City model is project-based exclusively, 100%. Right, so it was
That's correct, because they already had a sales tax.
right, but they don't bond. So I mean, we're not going to go back and forth on the debating necessarily. They don't have bonding power that we do here, so they don't bond for the same projects. Right. So I just making sure I get these things clear, so I'm tracking what I'm thinking of in the long term, and so. Had there been, what was the discussions around just targeting and exempting all of Anchorage residents? 100% exemption for Anchorage residents and only targeting the others, tourist or et cetera. What was this discussion around that? Because that would lead us to the 20% mark, at least. It wouldn't get us to the full number, but right, there may be some different decision-making what you do. If it was like only that for projects, that would seem more like the Oklahoma City model, which was targeting maps for projects without tax relief at the same proportion, which is essentially $30 to $50 million at a project level annually, right? So had there been consideration around just total exemptions for Anchorage and just collecting the outside dollars? And what was those discussions?
Not to my knowledge. There were discussions around making the tax seasonal, to try to hone in, Memorial Day to Labor Day, trying to hone in on tourism. And it was decided that it added too much complexity to the project. And as far as administration standpoint with point of sale software, it was easier to just keep it annual. I don't think anyone add to that or.
The only other piece I would add to the seasonality conversation that we had is that, thanks to the work of, tourism agencies, our tourism season is getting larger. It's going into the winter, and we intend to continue investing in that type of marketing so that we can grow winter tourism. And the other piece was that we looked at revenue models based on, a 3-month, 6-month, 9-month tax. And we found that there wasn't enough revenue that was generated from just the summer season, for instance, to make it a meaningful amount of investment that we could make in Anchorage. So those were some of the considerations that we had at the coalition and committee level when we considered seasonality specifically, which was exactly what you're talking about, but it's along the same lines of.
Member Johnson?
Yeah, thank you. So looking here at, and I understand this is still sort of draft language perhaps, but it has 4 main projects and then 2 supplemental projects that'll appear on the ballot. What do you envision as the process to get us to, from the 7 or 8 proposals we saw down to the 4 main and the 2 supplemental?
My assumption is it's going to go through both those committees, the project selection and the costing committee. So the idea of the supplemental projects is if you're oversubscribed or undersubscribed, it gives you, again, flexibility to go to some minor projects that you could execute at a lower dollar amount, and quickly you could add those in and pull those out.
So the thought is the selection committee essentially will make another pass over this list that they put together and then narrow it down some. Yep. Any additional steps that you guys expect me to take to help kind of inform, because I imagine already probably a lot of these projects, people looking at them and getting, it sounds like some of them aren't going to make it onto the ballot if the assembly even approves this. So how are you guys thinking about, I understand the selection committee is their own internal dialogue, but what sort of framework are they going to use? We talked about how we got to here, but what's the next generation going to look like?
We hope to get feedback from the assembly after this work session to get your thoughts on the projects. And then now that this will be a public process, we also hope to get public feedback on this final condensed list of projects, and then take that feedback back to the project selection committee after we calculate different exemptions, or I should say amendments to exemptions that are out there right now. We'll have a better idea of how much revenue we're going to have after those proposed exemptions passed, and then that will better inform the budget that we have. So there's still a few moving pieces over the next few weeks as some of those things are solidified. But this is another opportunity for the public to weigh in on what they're excited about.
Thank you.
On the projects, we want to kind of have the projects defined. We don't want to submit projects and then you could argue we should put a mechanism in there saying, hey, we can change the projects down the road if we want to. Well, then you could end up in a real bait and switch type scenario. So, but I do agree there should be some form of flexibility. Let's say none of these projects proves feasible for one reason or another. There should be some sort of mechanism. And I think, well, George was there. We heard someone's, I think incorrectly stated the Oklahoma City model was they passed a tax, they'd pull for a project, do the project, complete it, pull for the next project. It's my understanding that's not how that worked, but then you're asking voters to sort of trust us. We're going to build projects, but we don't know what they are yet. So, Daniel, go ahead. Or
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I want to go back to the kind of same theme that I was on before. So the project selection committee exists and brought these projects forward. I think these projects look really cool. I'm curious about the demographics of the project selection committee. Could you break that down for us in terms of geographic, men versus women, racial? What type of diversity is represented on the project selection committee?
I don't have the names in front of me. I'm so sorry, but I can get that for the assembly as a follow-up item. But that was certainly something that was important to us. We wanted to get people from certainly across Anchorage, different perspectives from Anchorage, different industries, different ages, different genders. So yes, we considered that when we put the committee together, but I just don't have the list in front of me, but I'm happy to give it to you.
I think that'd be helpful. Thank you.
okay. Mr. Littlefield?
Thank you. I had a quick question and I was looking at when they're running down the figures and everything else, you have a variable on every one. But when you get the Eagle River, you only have $9 million and you look at it, the three comparisons, one's 72 million, one's 110 million, 112 million, and one's 120 million dollars. So I'm thinking this needs a variable on there because doing a little research with the folks out there, we were talking somewhere in the neighborhood of 45 million and I looked at 9 million. I think we're a little short. So I don't know where we're going with this.
I can provide some context to that. So there's in Eagle River, the project is the Eagle River Sports Facility, and there's already a group of community members. There's a formal board that's formed to be looking at this project. And there's two different types of structure you can do. The more expensive structure is a steel structure, and that is the estimate that's closer to 30 to 50 million. Whereas if you did more of like a dome or sprung-like structure, using estimates from the recent acquisition for the port, that brought the cost down. And so we were proposing more of a dome-like structure for both the Eagle River facility as well as a potential East Anchorage Sports Center as well. And so that's where the cost discrepancy is. The steel structure would have just been more expensive.
So I'll say the inspirations are not our projects. Like the gathering place, I think was either 500 million or $1 billion project. We're obviously not doing that. So, Mr. Martinez?
Thank you, Randy. This may be for council. So I want to make sure that Dean is flagging this. So it's not necessarily about the projects, but about the procedure, if you could. What is the threshold of passing electorally for a ballot initiative of the sales tax? What does it have to achieve to be voted in by the public? That's my question for council.
Thank you. I've advised on this question a few times in relation to this project as well as in the past. So we're in a situation where amending our charter, we have a court ruling that says that's 50% plus one action by the Alaska Constitution. We have our new charter, a 3/5 vote requirement to adopt sales tax. So if you have a ballot measure that just says asks the voters to approve the sales tax, and it's not amending the charter, then that's a 3/5 vote requirement. But if you have a charter amendment that's authorizing the assembly to levy a sales tax, that's a charter amendment, that's a 50% plus one vote requirement. And that's what this proposal is. And so that's, I guess, trying to be brief, a short answer, if that's sufficient.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And just so I can make sure I hear it in the language that I'll remember, which is my own voice, obviously. It's what I heard you say, Dean, was that if there was a ballot initiative that was asking the voters to implement a sales tax, according to the charter today, that would require 3/5 vote of the voters.
Yes.
But that this particular initiative is following another lane of procedure that defines that if the charter is amended, the charter amendment is only requires 50% plus one.
Yes.
And
that's
that this
correct.
particular charter amendment would include a sales tax that essentially would avoid the 3/5 vote according to charter today. Is that?
Yeah, that's correct. There's those two paths to authorize a sales tax. And I would add that this latter path has been used several times to add an additional 4% hotel tax in 2004, I think, and also to authorize the marijuana retail sales tax and the alcoholic beverages retail sales tax. Each of those was a charter amendment requiring 50% plus one.
Right, I remember the public debates at that time. Thank you.
Any other members? Okay, it looks like it's gonna be fairly short and sweet. So I will say this is part of the public process. This is why we're having this. This is why we're waiting on the yes version. So we are open to ideas as we've been throughout the entire process. So if someone does have a better way or feels that maybe more ambiguity around projects is something that is needed, I would say somehow get it to the sponsors or make an amendment so we can include it. Any final comments? All good?
I could make one clarifying comment as I was sitting here, and we were talking about the project selection committee earlier. I would almost characterize it more as like an organization committee, because really what they did is they took a long list of projects and sent it out to the public, and those numbers are what's informing the projects that we're looking at today. So they're helping to organize it, but really it was the public that helped inform that. So I was thinking about that as I was sitting over here.
Okay, with nothing else, we will adjourn. Thank you.